So I'd like to thank you all for coming and welcome everybody to it. The meeting tonight has been hosted by the Centre for Kurdish Progress and is brought to you by Peace in Kurdistan and the campaign, the Coalition Against Chemical Warfare. The speakers tonight are, first of all, Kamaran Osman, who's from the Christian Peacekeepers teams in Iraqi Kurdistan, Lindsey, who probably needs little introduction to most of you, but Lindsey's speaking on behalf of the Stop the War Coalition. And then we'll have Steve Sweeney, as I said, is the author of the report we're launching tonight. We'll put details of the report in the chat where you'll be able to access it or send an email to Steve and we'll put the details out in the chat. So if you look out for them later on. Okay, we're going to get started. And I think most people have joined the meeting. So thank you all for coming along. The situation in South Kurdistan has been going on for months. Turkish forces have been on the ground and in the air, bombarding Kurdish villages, Kurdish personnel, refugee camps, hospitals, amongst other sites. You won't know about this if you rely on the mainstream media, the BBC or the Guardian or any of these outlets. You won't have read much about this at all. And we've been relying in this country on the Morning Star, Steve's regular reports on the situation to learn about it, as well as in the Kurdish media. So hopefully tonight we're able to inform you about what's been going on. From, as I said, from on the ground witnesses who know what's going on, and we'll also have that kind of put that in a wider context of the campaign to stop war and the situation in the region generally. So without any further ado, I'm going to move on to the first speaker, Kamaran. Osman, as I said, is from the Christian Peacekeepers teams in Iraqi Kurdistan. He is a freelance journalist. He's speaking to us tonight from Suleimania in Kurdistan. Kamaran co-founded the Pioneer Youth Board Organisation for Basic Rights and is also freelance for a number of years as a journalist and reported for multiple independent media outlets. Kamaran, we're very pleased to have you with us and I would invite you to speak to the meeting. Thank you, Kamaran.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this evening. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Kamaran Osman. I'm from Christian Peacemaker teams. I originally from Iraqi Kurdistan. I'm a local team member of Christian Peacemaker teams. Our team has been established in 2006 in Iraqi Kurdistan. We are based in Suleimania. Since this time, since 2006, CPT is documenting the impact of the Turkish and Iranian cross-border bombings. We are building partnership with the villagers, with the farmers, with most of the civilian people that they have been impacted by the Iranian and Turkish cross-border bombings, or the war between PKK and Turkey, and the war between PJAK and also KDPI and Iran as well. So if you are talking about the Turkish occupation in Kurdistan, we have to go back for 1980s. For the first time that Turkey artillery shelled Iraqi Kurdistan and they violated the border, they targeted civilian people, and in that artillery shelling, almost 100 civilian people were died, and also some Peshmerga. I don't know how much you are aware about the political dynamic and the political situation in Iraqi Kurdistan. We have Peshmerga as the military force of KRG, so they targeted Peshmerga people as well. So since in 1980s and 1990s, it was mostly artillery shelling, and also sometimes helicopters were coming to Kurdistan to shoot inside of the villages, and also using fighter jets in some occasions. Turkey, in this time, Turkey took the advantage of the civil war between PUK and KDP to build some bases, military bases. And since this time, these bases are still in KRG, and using an agreement that it was between Turkey and Baath's regime to enter 20 kilometers inside of KRG, and they built multiple military bases. Now they are still in Iraqi Kurdistan, these military bases. So Turkey, after 2007, they were more actively using the fighter jets to bombing the Iraqi Kurdistan and the border villages. In 2012 to 2015, during the peace process between PKK and Turkey, Turkey used this advantage to, they took the advantage to like improve their military skills, and especially manufacturing Bayraktar TB2 drone that they are not only monitoring or observing, they can also bombing, and they can stay in the sky for 24 hours with a limited, like they are limited, they have a limitation to fly and going in a big distance. So after 2015, a new war, we can say a new war started, and not only against PKK members, but also against the civilian people, because the drones should be very precise to target the state actors and the conflicted actors targets. But actually, after Turkey manufactured Bayraktar TB2 drones, they are mostly targeting civilian people. And we have some stories. We as CPT, when some people would be die or some people would be injured and people would be displaced, we are going to the villages. We are getting the story directly from our partners, from the people that they have been targeted by this war. So what Turkey is doing, we have noticed that sometimes Turkey can easily hit their target and they bomb them, but they are waiting until the PKK vehicles and the armored vehicles will get the inhabitant areas and civilian areas. We observed one incident in Kandil zigzag road that a villager, his name was Muhammad, he was going to his village to farming, and the drones were waiting for a half hour until a PKK guerrilla, a PKK vehicle will get their car. Then they bombed both of them, and they killed 3 civilian people, and also they injured 5 members of the same family. They destroyed the family. And also in Kunamasi, in Suli area, in Suleymania, it is almost 35 to 40 kilometers far away from Suleymania. They were observing, or they were following a Peugeot vehicle for almost 1 hour until this car got a tourist area. Then they bombed the car, and they injured 5 family members in the same family. So Turkey nowadays, Turkey is targeting civilian people and PKK members together, and it has a message to tell people the presence of PKK in this area is a threat for you, for your life. It's not only about PKK, it's also about the civilian people as well. And according to all the humanitarian law and agreements, the war agreements, targeting the hospitals, targeting schools, targeting mosques, targeting churches, it is forbidden. But actually, we have observed that only in last year, one hospital was targeted, a church was targeted, 3 schools were closed because of the Turkish bombardments in Amedi area in the north of KRG. And also a lot of people had been displaced. Only in last year, more than 100 people, more than 100 families in Duhok Governorate were displaced because of the claw lightning operation. And some people, for example, Turkey had another operation in 2019 In that operation, they targeted a village 27 times only in 6 hours. They bombed 27 times, and all the villagers were displaced, and students were studying under the tent. And one thing for us was very we were very concerned about. The students were studying by the river, and the winter was coming, and the students were under the tent, and there were not any humanitarian aid for these people. They needed food. Nobody got food for them. Nobody delivered food for them. Nobody helped the students to have a better condition. We can say that in the past operations, for example, Claw Eagle operation in 2020, and also Claw Tiger operation, Turkey was targeting civilian people, killing them and injuring them. But in the Claw Lightning operation, it was a strategy to make a buffer zone. We made a very good map about that how Turkey is making a buffer zone and extending their military operation area. And also Turkey wanted people to be displaced in these areas. So they were not only targeting, they were forcing people to be displaced. Even when we went to the villages, the villagers told us that the soldiers in the night, they are coming down from the mountain, they are using the lighter to burn, to set the fire on their farmlands, to forcing them to leave their villages. And also the villagers had been told by Turkey, with the help of their translators, they had been told to leave the area. They directly told them, you are not allowed to come into your farmlands. If you are coming, we will target you. And actually, after 1 week of being told, one of the villagers, his name is Ramazan Ali, he went to his village, he went to his farm to irrigating his farmland, and he was targeted and he was severely injured. So we can easily say that this war is not against PKK only. It is against the civilian people as well, because since August 2015 until now, we have documented that more than 109 people had been, civilian people had been killed, and also 120 people, more than these, at least 120 people had been injured. Like more than 648 villages are under the threat of being completely evacuated. When we are saying they are under the threat of being like empty or being evacuated, it means we have some villages that 50 families or 60 families are living there, but because of that war, only 1 family, 2 families have been remained. We don't say it's completely evacuated, we say it's under the threat of being evacuated. And at least 150 villages are completely evacuated right now. And another
Kamaran, that's 10 minutes. You want to try and wind up?
Okay. I will say the last thing, and that's it. So actually, we have noticed that the KRG government also they are not helping people. The only thing that KRG and also Iraqi federal government is doing is only condemning the targets, and it's nothing for the people. They are not compensating them according to the constitution. They have to be compensated, and also they are not writing their death certificate in a right way. Some people had been killed, and they are writing they have been died because of the car accident or hard stroke. I don't want to take any more time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for that detailed and chilling account of what's happening on the ground in South Kurdistan. Thank you very much. Solidarity with yourself and your colleagues and friends who are there on the ground. I'm sure there'll be questions for you later on. Colleagues, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Lindsey. Lindsey German. Lindsey, we're very pleased to have you with us. Lindsey is a socialist writer and campaigner. She's a convener of Stop the War Coalition, which she helped to found in 2001. and she's been central to the anti-war movement in the UK, certainly for years before that as well. So her campaign activities include support for the anti-colonial movements, women's rights, trade union issues, and fundamentally opposing war. She's written extensively, produces a weekly briefing for Counterfire, and her books include several on women and co-authorship of A People's History of London. Lindsey, we're delighted to have you with us and invite you to address the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and it's very good to be here. And just to say, I'm looking forward very much to hearing Steve Sweeney's launch of the report, and also just to say, before moving on to a few of the things I wanted to say, to send solidarity to Kamaran. I think, you know, it's tremendous to hear this sort of explanation that you're giving, and to talk to people. And this is the kind of thing that really needs to be much more widely known and much more widely shared in this country and in many other countries, because one of the things that I wanted to start with really is that we've got a number of linked issues here, and yet they're not treated as linked issues. There's very, very little coverage of the situation among the Kurdish people, whether it's in northern Iraq, wherever we're talking about. There's very little mainstream coverage. When there is coverage, it's portrayed normally as that this is some kind of struggle, you know, terrorist struggle or whatever it is. It's portrayed in that kind of way. We're never told the history of it and the treatment of the Kurds, the biggest nationality without its own country in the world, and that this was something that has been promised for over 100 years now by the various powers in the world. We're not told about that. We're not told about the potential use of chemical weapons, and I'm going to say a little bit about that. I know Steve will be talking about that more. And we're not, of course, told very much about the real nature of what Turkey is doing in its very lengthy war against the PKK and against the Kurdish people, which has been going on for a very long time. And, you know, when you describe, Kamaran, the drone warfare in particular, I think for most people in this country, they would be amazed that this is going on, because we've been told, you know, there's some wars going on in the Middle East, but most of the time they don't concern us. They only concern us when our government's directly playing a leading role, or when there's a situation where there's the propaganda for intervention, as we've seen at various points over Syria. And we're not told that these are the daily reality of life for many, many people, not just Kurdish people in the Middle East, for many, many people in the Middle East, including, as we know, in Syria, in Iraq, and of course in Yemen, and that these are all things that we should be concerned about. And I think when you look at the events of the last year, and I think that you explained very well that this is a worsening situation, that the weaponry that's used is much more sophisticated. The assault on the people, on civilians in particular, is much greater than it was 15 or 20 years ago. That all of this has been escalated in plain sight, but it's something which is very, very much ignored by the Western media and by the Western politicians for most of the time. So very, very important that we have this this meeting, and that we try to get these kind of ideas out. Now, what I wanted to talk for a little bit was about what's happened over the last year or so with Operation Claw Lightning, and the way in which that has increasingly targeted civilians, and the way in which it is a very, very brutal operation designed not just to weaken the Kurdish opposition, but actually to criminalize the local population, to make them displaced, to was suffering under war in all this kind of way. And the chemical weapons attacks, let's just kind of think about this for a minute. Chemical weapons have been banned under international law since 1925, so for a century, but we know that they are produced, and we know that they are used in a whole number of different situations. The fact that the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons isn't actually preventing the use of chemical weapons, tells you exactly what is going on here. Because I'm afraid that when you look at the use of chemical weapons, and I think you have to be totally opposed to chemical weapons, whoever is using them. I think they're wrong. I think that they're incredibly damaging. They are real weapons of destruction and they shouldn't be allowed to be used. But when you look at them, of course, they have been used at various times by the United States, for example. We had Agent Orange in Vietnam. We have depleted uranium was used in Fallujah and has been used in other places. All of these are barely commented on. And the only time it seems to be commented on is when some of the governments, including the British and the US government, want to make some kind of international incident over them, as we've seen that with various questions over Syria. Even there, we should look at what the situation, even when chemical weapons have been used. All of the audience here, I'm sure, will be familiar with the attack on the Kurds in Halabja by Saddam Hussein. This was an attack in the Iran-Iraq war going back 30 or 40 years now. You're talking then about an attack which was a brutal attack, which was barely mentioned in the Western media. And actually, there was a very interesting book written around the time of the invasion of Iraq, nearly 20 years ago now, which pointed out that the whole question of Halabja and the use of chemical weapons was only something that was brought up by the United States and other governments that were then proposing war with Iraq, very, very near that invasion, exactly to try to make a case that this is a repellent kind of crime and it should be the justification for war. So there is an incredible amount of hypocrisy and double standards over the whole attitude towards chemical weapons. And surprise, surprise, as with most of these questions, the biggest powers are the ones that tend to be able to get away with them. And so I think that is worth thinking about in terms of what is happening to the Kurds. I also think that we need to look at the role of Turkey in terms of its attacks on the Kurds. And just a couple of things to say here, to put in perhaps slightly in the wider context that we might think about from Stop the War's point of view, that we've had a situation now where the Turkish government is used essentially to police the supposed refugee crisis which exists in Europe. And actually the refugee crisis only exists or largely exists because of the wars that we've been involved in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria and various other places in the region. So it's been used, Turkey is used to police the refugee crisis for the European Union. It also, of course, is a member of NATO and a very, very important strategic member of NATO because of its geographical location and because of the way in which it operates. And I think it's these partly explain, I mean, the refugee thing is obviously a much more recent thing, whereas membership of NATO is now very long-standing for Turkey. But it's these kind of things, I think, which explain the way that Turkey is allowed to get away with so much in terms of its attacks on the PKK, in terms of its attacks on the Kurds, in terms of all of these different kind of things. And I think it's worth mentioning, I mean, we're talking tonight about the Middle East, we're not talking about other areas of the world, but we know that there's now a very, very big crisis and the threat of war in Ukraine, and whatever our position on that is, and whatever we think about all of this, I think we have to look at NATO as an organization which has played an increasingly aggressive role over the years, and where Turkey has played a very important part of being part of NATO. NATO's expansion throughout Eastern Europe and much wider than that, now even talking about the Indo-Pacific, is, I think, a real danger for us all, but it also means that NATO will protect its own members, and Turkey therefore escapes a lot of the criticism that might otherwise come to it for exactly that reason. I think it's important for us to understand that. So just thinking about these various issues and how to kind of bring them together, it seems to me that we have to, for those of us in countries like Britain, I think it's extremely important that we do see the Kurdish question as part of the things that we should be concerned about when we're talking about foreign policy and when we're talking about the role of our government. And the hypocrisy of the Johnson government, the hypocrisy of a whole number of British governments over this question is really quite remarkable. So I think that when we're talking about here, when we're talking about the question of people in Britain and how they respond to the Kurdish question, I think there's a number of things that we have to do. The first is to make people really aware of what is going on in the area, and that, I think, Steve's report on this is going to be a very important contribution to doing that. Secondly, we have to hold our and other governments to account, and we have to say it's not acceptable what is happening with in the region. It's not acceptable, particularly what is happening with Turkey. And I think thirdly, we have to be opposed to the increased warmongering. I don't think you can separate totally what is going on with the Kurdish people to what is happening in other parts of the world. When we talk about increasing weaponization of militarism, of the use of drones, which, you know, the targeting of these wars is almost exclusively towards civilians. And anybody who says otherwise is not telling the truth, because these are the people who suffer. These are the people who die. These are the people who become refugees. These are the people who become displaced in their own country. So we need to bring all these things together, I think. And I hope that the meeting tonight will be a contribution to doing that. And just to say thank you very much for inviting me to speak at it. When we set up Stop the War in 2001, we always had the support of the Kurdish and Turkish communities in this country, and we've always been, I hope we've always managed to support them, but we've certainly been very, very grateful for that support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsey. That was excellent. Thank you very much. We're moving on now to Steve Sweeney. As I said before, Steve is the international editor of the Morning Star, and those of you who have the good sense to get the Morning Star every day, and you can subscribe to it and you can do it online and all the rest of it, you'll have been reading Steve's reports from the region for a past number of years, and I think it's the one genuine source of information in the British media that you can actually get these reports about what's happening in the Kurdish region. Steve has written a report from the ground. He's not sat here, written a report based upon what he sees online. He's been over there, based himself in South Kurdistan for many periods of time, and has spoken to eyewitnesses. In his report gives harrowing details and of what is happening on the ground, but also exposes the lie of what the Turkish state is trying to do. As has already been said, Turkey as a NATO member, that means an ally of the UK, one who we supply arms to, who we negotiate trade deals with, and as Lindsey points out, who our government relies on to police the refugee crisis in that region. What Turkey is doing in South Kurdistan is the subject of Steve's reports, and you'll have seen in the chat, hopefully, the report has been posted there. So also Steve's put his own email in there. You can email him if you want a copy sent to you, and we suggest, ask you all to do that and share it around as far and wide in your own organisations, trade unions, political parties, and elsewhere, so that the message gets out about what is happening there. With no further ado, Steve, thank you for all you do, and please address the meeting. Thank you. You're still muted.
Yeah,
you got it.
Thank you very much. And I think, you know, just to kind of follow on from the last two speakers who put the Turkey's war on Kurds in context, and NATO's name was mentioned, and I think that one of the things that I always say is that this isn't just Turkey's war on Kurds. This is NATO's war on Kurds. This is a war that is being waged by the imperialist powers, by the United Nations, by Britain, by the United States. And it isn't a war against the PKK. This is a war against the Kurdish people. And I found this is Operation Claw Lightning, which was started now for 10 months. For 10 months, Turkey has been waging a war to virtual global silence. It's been accused of chemical attacks. The OPCW and the world bodies are refusing to send fact-finding teams there, and there's political reasons for that, which I'll come into. But this is a story not just about Turkey's chemical attacks. It's not a story just about Turkey's war crimes. This is a story about collusion, corruption, and conspiracy by the world powers. So this report, when I was in the region, I managed to get into the affected areas. I met with many people that have been affected by chemical weapons. Many of the villagers, nearly all of the people that I met and spoke to were civilians. I spoke to agricultural workers, I spoke to teachers, I spoke to Peshmerga fighters. More importantly, I spoke to medics who had treated people for what they said were chemical attacks. And I spoke to one medic who had compiled a report and said that that they had treated a number of people for exposure to chemicals, and this report was then taken by security forces and altered. And it was the KDP that I was told that entered the medical facility, and they commandeered the report. And they altered it so that the next day it read very differently and gave a very different idea of what had happened. And I spoke to the medic and I said, well, what happened? Did anybody challenge this? And they said, yes, of course we did. We challenged it because it was almost saying that we didn't know what we were doing, that we were, we didn't, but we're trained in this region. Everybody knows what a chemical attack looks like. This is a region that has been plagued by chemical attacks for decades. And they were told very clearly that if they challenged it, then they would either be dismissed from their employment or even worse. And the even worse, the implication was that they would be detained, tortured, killed, this kind of thing. So I met many people. I met individuals that showed me the effects of chemical attacks. Their arms were still burnt. One man, I held his arm and it was still warm. This was months after the attack. All of them had breathing difficulties. They were coughing and wheezing. I spoke to a Peshmerga fighter who said that him and his family had been exposed to chemicals. And again, he highlighted that as Peshmerga fighters, they have, I think, like 2 weeks of training in how to deal with chemical attacks. So they know they know that chemical attacks have taken place. The village Mukhtars know that chemical attacks have been taking place, but they're being told that to raise this is a problem, and it would cause a problem for them and in terms of the Turkish, what is it, let's say as a Turkish occupation. Now, I think Kamaran kind of went some way into explaining, but the scale of Turkey's occupation of the region, I think, is something that people may not understand. And when I was there, I managed to see some of the bases that are being constructed. According to Hulusi Akar, who is the Turkish defense minister, he came to the region last year and he stood and he was talking about Turkey's operations against the PKK. Didn't even bother to tell the Iraqi foreign minister that he was going, but he said that there was something like 40 bases. But now this is doubled, and the bases are linked by roads, a road network which allows the shipping of troops, soldiers, and weapons. But it also crosses out into Turkey, so they can take natural resources out of the country. And we know that the felling of woods, for example, to make way for the bases, the wood from that is being shipped out of the country, and it is being used by Turkish furniture companies as well. So we know that the military occupation is something like 30 kilometers deep inside Iraqi Kurdistan now. And while I was in the affected areas, we heard the bombing. People say that it's like a living hell, and that they're being bombed every single day. And while I was there, I heard gunfire, we heard missiles falling, but people are being threatened. They're being told to keep quiet about the attacks, and if they speak out, there is a risk to them. There's a risk to their family. I spoke to farmers who said that their cattle have been burnt. One farmer said that he went to his cattle, and they were all dead, but there was burning by the cattle. And in one of the fields, that this burning went on for days. So this wasn't a normal kind of fire. That the burning was something that was continuing, and this was affecting their bodies. I have a sample. I have some samples. I went to the region. I've collected here. We have one. This is a sample of soil from the region. I also have samples of clothing and hair, but there was a general unwillingness to test them for chemicals. It also, we should, as Kamaran was alluding to, something close to 2,000 now, I think, villagers have been forcibly displaced, forced to flee their homes due to the bombing. I was in areas that were pretty much ghost villages, scores of ghost villages, completely emptied. Many of them, the ones that are remaining, that I think there's handfuls of people there. Most people have either fled to the cities or to their families elsewhere. Now, this, we have to say, there's strong evidence to suggest that Turkey has used chemical weapons. It has quite a long history in using chemical weapons, going back to the Dersim massacre. And Sabiha Gökçen was Ataturk's adopted daughter, was one of those that dropped chemicals on the Kurds. And according to historians, Turkey was purchasing Zyklon B from the Nazis that it was using during that period. Now, the evidence is fairly strong. I'm not a chemical weapons expert, and I don't need to be, but the people on the ground, I've been told by medics, by villagers, by officials, by Peshmerga forces, by security officials, that are convinced that chemical weapons are being used. The symptoms that I saw, again, from people that have been affected, would indicate that chemical weapons have been used. Now, bearing this in mind, it is incumbent on the world powers to carry out investigations. The report mentions the OPCW, the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and I probably haven't got time to go into too much detail about this, but there is there's a reluctance on their part to investigate. Now, they have been sent many reports. I've contacted them on many occasions, asking them to comment on chemical attacks, to ask why they're not investigating the chemical attacks, and I've been met with a blank. My media accreditation was refused for their annual conference at the end of last year. And again, this is, as somebody that writes quite regularly about the OPCW, this came as a bit of a surprise. It's judged by a panel, so we can only conclude that decision was political. The OPCW itself is, when you look at who bankrolls it, Britain, France, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and last year Germany donated €1 million, which is the biggest, I think, single donation the OPCW has ever received. So we have to say that this, there's an old saying that he who pays the piper plays the tune. And I think we can safely say that this is the case for the OPCW. It was, of course, headed at one point by Ahmet Özumcu, who is a Turkish diplomat. He was the Secretary General of that organization for a period. And we can argue about that, whether it's merely a coincidence, but there seem to be a lot of these coincidences. And my strong suspicion is that there's a vested interest in these organizations who are funding the OPCW for them not to carry out investigations, because the trail, I believe, would lead back to their door. It would lead back to the door of Germany. It would lead back to the door of the United Kingdom. We know that, for example, that 70 licenses for munitions that can be used armed with white phosphorus have been licensed by Britain to Turkey. We know this. I've submitted freedom of information request to find out more details. There's been a bit of a delay with that, as the government has refused to release that information, so I've had to try again. So we can say that there is collusion among the world powers. I want to come on to, again, another Makmur, Kandil and Shengal. And these three are critical in terms of the narrative. All three of these areas are under pretty much constant bombardment. More recently, you would have seen on February the 1st, the Turkish airstrikes on Makmur and Shengal, in which 5 people were killed, I think, across both those areas. Now, these three areas, Shengal, Makmur and Kandil, all have one thing in common, and that is they all operate under a system of self-administration and following the principles or the guidelines of democratic confederalism, which is the guiding ideology of the Kurdistan Workers' Party leader, Abdullah Öcalan. But they all operate along those principles. Now, Makmur is a refugee camp. This is a UN-administered refugee camp. And it's home to some 12,000 people. I mean, I've stayed there for a few weeks, and it's a fully functioning society. It's facing very huge problems. It's suffering from a KRG-imposed blockade. It's surrounded by ISIS. I was told there were 80 ISIS cells in the mountains surrounding us. And it is regularly, when I was there, drones flew overhead every single day and every single night in a bid to intimidate the camp. Now, again, the report goes into a bit more detail about this, but the silence from the UNHCR is deafening. And again, I contact them frequently on the issue of Makmur and whether they'll comment on the bombings and the airstrikes, and they don't reply. Although I did get a very strange reply on one occasion in which they denied knowledge of a blockade, denied knowledge of the airstrikes, and said that they didn't administer the camp. Now, all of these three things were absurd, of course, because there's been protests outside their offices about the blockade. The airstrike was actually admitted to by the Turkish state and was on their website. And I've been in there and seen the UNHCR bodies. That came as a big surprise to the camp officials. But again, the bombing of a refugee camp is a war crime. And this is chemical weapons have been allegedly dropped on the camp, and if this was anywhere else in the world, there would be an absolute outcry. There would be outrage, and there would be sanctions, or who knows what would happen. But in this case, there's abject silence. And very recently, I've had some conversations with the UNHCR, and on Thursday, they've invited me for what they said is an off the record chat, which is not the most sensible of things to have with a journalist. And we'll see what they have to say. But again, this is part of the broader collusion of world forces, because this bombing could not take place without the explicit consent of the United States, without the explicit consent of NATO. And there is some evidence going back to the 2006 Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks cables suggested that there was some collusion with the UNHCR and Turkey to close the camp down. Now, the reason that Turkey describes it as an incubator of terrorism, and that it's linked to the PKK. Now, many of the people in the camp are supporters of the PKK. It runs the system of democratic confederalism. But to say it's a PKK base is absurd, and this is this absolute nonsense. And I think this is again an attempt, as Lindsey was saying earlier, to criminalise the Kurdish struggle and to criminalise the Kurdish people. And I think coming on later, the report recommends that delisting of the PKK is absolutely essential in stopping Turkey's wars. Again, in Shengal, I don't think there's anywhere in the world where it's more apparent that world powers are colluding against a people than in Shengal. Shengal is, for those that don't know, Shengal is a home to the Yazidi people that was subject to the 2014 genocide at the hands of ISIS. Thousands of men and boys were massacred. More than 3,000 women and girls were sold into sexual slavery. Now, this area again, I've been into this area, and the most chilling thing that I found here was there's some difficulties in terms of the Yazidi people returning home. They want to return home now that many thousands were displaced and they've been living in camps across Iraqi Kurdistan. But Turkey continues to bomb it, and it's preventing them from returning to their homeland. But even worse than that, just last year, the Turkish Air Force bombed a hospital in Şengal, in the Şengal district. Bombed a hospital, killed 4 health workers and 4 other officials. Now, bombing a hospital under any circumstances is a war crime, but there was absolute silence again from the world community. YBS commander Saeed Hassan was an extrajudicial execution. His car was hit by a drone as he was on his way to meet Mustafa al-Kadhimi, the Iraqi Prime Minister. The first time that somebody of that seniority had come to the region for decades. I think even probably not since Saddam Hussein's time. But again, silence. 2 of the elected officials, the co-chair of the autonomous administration there, again, killed in a drone strike, a targeted drone strike. But again, there's been absolute silence from the international community, who what they have done instead is signed a horrific deal, the Sinjar agreement, which essentially seeks to rid the area of armed gangs, as they call it. They really mean the PKK. The PKK is not there, by the way, and the YBS is actually part of the Iraqi armed forces, or is integrating into the Iraqi armed forces. So, yeah. If
you want to start winding up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, look. I think, again, just to mention, Kamaran mentioned Kunamasi, and I've dropped something in the chat which happened there. This was the resort that was targeted by Turkish drone strikes. It's not clear whether they were targeting any PJAK fighters at all, actually. But again, this is the civilians are taking the brunt of Turkey's drone strikes. One thing is very clear, is that the continued silence of the OPCW is absolutely untenable. The evidence of chemical weapons use is stacking up. Like I said, I spoke to 13 people who were describing, the gas, the choking, they were vomiting, they had, blurry eyes. I've seen the burn marks, I've seen the coughing, and I've been to the areas that were affected, and my observations lead me to conclude that Turkey has been using chemicals. But again, I'm a journalist, I'm not a chemical weapons expert, and it's not incumbent for me to say yes or no. The chemicals were used. It's up to the world powers, the OPCW, the people that can carry out those investigations, to send a fact-finding team to the area. They've carried out, there's been airstrikes and things that have been carried out, and with far less evidence. But also, we have to say that Turkey must be held to account for its war crimes. I can't think of any other country on earth, well, maybe the United States, that manages to get away with such blatant, blatant crimes being waged against a people. When Erdogan bombed Makmur, he told them he was doing it as a United Nations member state. He said, if you don't clear up the camp, I will. 2 days later, he launched an airstrike. But again, sometimes we're extremely concerned, but most of the time it's silent. So, I mean, I'll finish there because, I just want to say the last thing that I would say, look, is this. The world looked away when Saddam Hussein was building up his chemical stockpile, most of which was sold to him by Western companies. 5,000 Kurds in Halabja died and were gassed as a result of that. We must not let that happen again. I'll finish there, and maybe I can come back at the end. Some questions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. That was a terrific contribution to the meeting. I'm sorry I had to cut you off, but we could listen to more, but then people wouldn't have to read the report then, Steve. As I said earlier on, there are links in the chat to the report. You can download that and read it yourself. Steve's also put his email address in. If you want to email him to get a copy sent to you, then please do. Kamaran has also put in some links to some of the work that he's involved in Kurdistan. So please take the time to look at that. We're going to finish this meeting at 8:30, so we do have time for questions. I want to give each of the three speakers some time at the end just to come back on any points that have been made. But we do have time for some questions. So you'll know how to use Zoom just now. There's a hand facility. You can raise your hand. But the first question is from Frederica, who had a question. Frederica, can you unmute yourself, or do I have to do that?
I think you have to do it.
All right. Oh, bear with me till I find you. I think you can unmute now.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, Steve. Hello, colleague. I've been following it for months, of course, this whole chemical weapons affair. I would love to write about it if there's evidence, and it's very hard. I've just written for Media News and for my newsletter about it. And spoken to several people. It's very hard to talk to the OPCW, by the way, really very hard. I tried it too, and they just, you know, finally in the end they reply with some link to something on their website, but they never ever get into specific questions, which is really weird. But one of the things I wonder about is, how could you already said, and it's the same for me, like we're not experts, but there's also a thing like incendiary weapons, and it could be those kind of weapons as well, and the OPCW isn't responsible for that, so that could be going on as well. And if it is chemical weapons, I understand if PKK members get killed, that it's not so easy to, you know, to make videos or, you know, but if it's other people, if it's civilians that are affected, it should be possible to have video, photo, whatever. And I haven't seen any of that. So it's for me like, okay, there's no attention in mainstream media, but I also work for mainstream media, and it's just really a very hard story to write, because there is, you know, there's no proof. There's a video of a cave and smoke is coming out, and people say, yeah, might as well be tear gas. Yeah, and tear gas cannot be used in that way, you know, it's also banned. But it could be tear gas, could be anything, can be chemical weapons too, but we just don't know. So there's not enough material to base any story on. So I have to resort to, like, wrote a column about one of the whole situation around it that you sketch, also the geopolitical situation. If Turkey is using chemical weapons, it's getting away with it. And that is because of all this, of course, being NATO member, and that the area is hard to access. But still, have you considered, for example, that it's incendiary weapons and the OPCW doesn't have anything to do with it? And how have you thought about how to distinguish one from the other if you are there, and these kind of questions? I'm a little bit the advocate of the devil here, but you know my intentions are good.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to take a couple of questions first before I ask Steve and the others to come back on that. Celatine has asked to ask a question. Celatine, are you there?
Hi, everybody. I'm from media based, broadcasting based in the Brussels, English departments, English service departments. Actually, sorry for the without the video connection, because I don't have the webcam and I don't have enough the battery also in my smartphone. My question for everybody, actually, as we learned that from an investigation report of our journalist colleague, Matt Bromfield, in the classified UK websites, Britain has quietly resumed arms exports to Turkey again. And as I remember that when the occupation starting in Afrin, and there was many protests individually in UK against the arms selling to Turkey. And as a result of this protest, probably, in 2019, when Turkey started again second occupation, military occupation in the Gresiki and Tel Abyad area, the Johnson government resumed, resumed at least the arm export to Turkey, the NATO ally, the countries, the Turkey. But the last December, in the government of Boris Johnson, quite resumed the normal licensing again. Britain has sold nearly £1 billion worth of military goods to Turkey since 2016. Some of these exports have enabled Turkey to use in Rojava and most probably in Iraqi Kurdistan too. And including this, the arm exports, there is a laser targeting system for F-16 bomber aircraft, other warplane components and bomb racks, and the guidance system for Turkey's Bayraktar 2 drones, which is usually recently used not only in Kurdistan and Rojava, Iraqi Kurdistan and Rojava, also they used Libya and Azerbaijan and different areas. My question is, wouldn't it be nice to start some sort of campaign in Britain to stop these arms sales? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a couple of hands have went up, so I'm just going to take the questions. We'll keep them coming. If you've got a question, please put your hand up. So Margaret Owen had her hand up. Margaret, you want to go ahead? Can you unmute?
No. Can you hear me now?
That's you. That's you. When you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Margaret. Thanks.
Well, very, very quickly. As you know, we keep putting questions to the UK government, to Lord Ahmed. We keep getting the answers back. I think I just sent you an email, which is always about they show great concern, but since there's no evidence and everybody should use the right channels through the OPCW, which doesn't do anything. I just do hope that you get that we have to have that independent delegation going to find out what is actually going on. And because I'm particularly concerned all the time about the impact of all of this on women and children, I'm sure that actually the use of chemical weapons is actually affecting women in particular ways. I'm sure that we need to have, when you have your delegation, that you have medical experts who can actually look to see. I've heard rumors about there's more miscarriages, what's actually happening and how it's affecting, you know, women's reproductive health. But it just seems to me that the UK is now absolutely complicit in this by silence, by showing it says concern and yet throwing it off to the OPCW. We're getting all these ridiculous answers. We'll go on asking the questions, but I just do hope that you get your delegation to get there and that we actually are able to provide the terrible, terrible consequences of using chemical weapons. And we all remember Halabja and Anfield and what happened then. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. The next question is from Rasul.
Yes, thank you for having me. Rasul Muhammad is talking to you from Iraqi Kurdistan, directly from Arbil. I have a question for Sir Steve. Is Turkey able to make chemical weapons? My first question. Why the whole Europe and America is silent about bombing Kurdish people by chemical weapons nowadays. Also in 1980s, in the last century, we were attacked by chemical weapons. I saw people who were bombed by chemical weapons in districts of Arbil in Balisan in 1987. Mr. Kamaran also knows about that. Why both blocks, Western Bloc, America and European countries, also Soviet Union, were silent at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasul Mohammed. There's no more hands up at the moment, so I'm going to go to Steve. Steve, do you want to try and respond to some of those questions? There's quite a few questions.
I'll go through them as quickly as I can. I've noticed Frederica's away from her desk, so I'll answer hers last. I'll start with Russell's. Hopefully, I can come and meet you in Erbil next week when I'm there. But I think the question, can we make chemical weapons? I have no idea. I'm not an expert in this field, but I strongly suspect that if Turkey is using chemical weapons, that it's not making its own. I would imagine that it's getting them from other people, Western countries, particularly Britain, the US. This kind of thing, and there is some kind of evidence to suggest that Turkey has been using chemical weapons, I think, in many other areas, and I'll come on to that when I answer Frederica's question. Why is Europe silent? I think one of the biggest mistakes people often make, I think in my view, is believing that Turkey acts as an independent state in this, and I think that it doesn't. Turkey's acting, as NATO's battering ram across the Middle East, and Turkey's working alongside. It's a US client state, so it's acting in the interest of the forces of imperialism. Coming on to Frederica's question, of course, skepticism is, I think, a healthy thing. I approach everything with a very, very skeptically. I know that there has been some kind of challenges to the claims of chemical weapons attack, and I think they've been launched by people with not as good intentions as yourself, Frederica. People from organisations like Bellingcat, for example, who have their own, they're a pro-imperialist CIA cutout. So I'm not particularly interested in what they're saying, but I think the skepticism is very healthy. One of the difficulties is that the people in the region are scared of speaking out. So, for example, I have photographs, I have videos, but the people there are threatened by the KDP. They're threatened that if they speak out, that they will be killed. They're threatened that if they, they're asked to spy for the KDP in Turkey. This is another thing that's happening. It happened in Şengöl. It's happening in the affected areas as well. But these people know. They're very, very well aware of what a chemical attack is. This is a region that's been plagued by chemical attacks for decades. And when people are telling me, when medics are telling me that they've made a diagnosis of chemical attacks, then I'm going to believe that. I'm going to believe their judgment. When Peshmerga forces who have had training in chemical weapons are saying that that they believe that it's a chemical attack, I'm not in a position to disbelieve them. These aren't people that have a political axe to grind in particular, and when they're saying that they're being forced to cover up and they're being forced to change their reports, of course suspicions are raised. Now, I'm not an expert in chemical weapons either, but I think when the sheer volume of the allegations that are being levelled at that Turkey has been used, it warrants investigation at the very least. And while we don't know whether chemicals have or haven't been used, of course incendiary devices have been used. They are being used, and some of the things that have been submitted as evidence, unfortunately, were very clearly not. For example, the green gas was very clearly military grade flare. I knew that instantly, and I raised my concerns straight away. But unfortunately, and the report details this, it was used as evidence in the German parliament. And what it does is it gives the ready excuse for them to bat it back and then say, well, look, this is not a chemical attack. And then, it kind of disarms us. The British government has responded in exactly the same way. And they've said that these are, they're not chemical attacks. And they've questioned that the only evidence you've produced is testimony from the PKK and Kurdish media sources without any concrete evidence. And, you know, while they're quite right, you know, we don't want to be giving them the excuse to do that. But I think there's a very, very clear case now for those investigations to be conducted. There's a reluctance to go to the region. They've been invited many, many times to go there. Kamaran, I know, has been there, and the Christian Peacemakers team have suggested that, that chemical weapons have been used on occasion as well. And, you know, this is, you know, when you stack up all the evidence, then I think that, you know, it certainly warrants investigation. And I think that there is some kind of collusion and cover-up. You look at Turkey's history. Turkey has used chemical weapons, or alleged to use chemical weapons in Afrin. Now, there was evidence, there was video footage, there were people in hospital you know, with breathing difficulties, and the Afrin Health Council asked the world powers to come and look. Now, this is in Syria. You know, when the Syrian government were carrying out attacks, the world powers were very, very quick to act. When it happened in Afrin, Washington simply just said, oh, well, Turkey probably didn't do it. That was it. That was their response to that. And, you know, they failed to investigate some very serious. And, you know, there's, again, mentioned in the report, there's a declassified report from 2014 that suggested that Turkey was working with Saudi Arabia and other countries with a sarin producing factory in Syria that was being used by jihadist groups there. So I would suggest that the evidence points to the you know, if you work it out on the balance of probabilities, I'd say it's probably quite likely that they are. On the arms sales, again, yes, just very quickly on that, Lindsey will probably be able to say a little bit more about this, because I think, you know, this is the kind of stop the wars area. But, you know, while the licenses were quietly resumed in December, the arms sales never stopped. In reality, the arms sales continued. The licensing only applied to new licenses, so they only paused new licenses for new arms sales. So since Boris Johnson came to power in whenever that was, June 2019, there's been 77 million pounds worth of arms sold to Turkey, and this includes helicopter parts. The helicopter parts that have been used in the attacks in Iraqi Kurdistan. We know that, again, that I said that there's been 70 licenses at least for munitions that can be loaded with white phosphorus. And white phosphorus is a possibility, by the way, that has been used this is one of the reasons the OPCW will look for any opportunity they can to crawl out of this and not do anything. But the answer is, where did they get the white phosphorus from? Again, who do we know that uses white phosphorus? We know that the Americans have used it in Syria, for example. I've reported on this, and we do know that there is collusion. The rat lines that are bringing in jihadist, which I didn't mention in my opening, that there's, you know, the resurgence of ISIS and the jihadists that are being shipped in via rat lines from Syria and from Turkey, not just by Turkey, but with the collusion of the United States, according to security officials on the ground. But yeah, I think hopefully that's covered those questions anyway.
Thanks, Steve. Kamaran, you get your hand out, you want to come in?
Thank you so much. Actually, about the chemical weapon, I didn't have time to talk about that. I'm just like briefly talk a little bit about that. We as CPT, we are not expert to say it is chemical weapon have been used or not. But we are meeting with the people, we are sharing their stories. We met with the people that they had been impacted by a suspect. It's suspicion. We have doubt. We are not sure if it's chemical weapon or not. So we have doubt that chemical weapon had been used on September 4th and September 19th in last year. It was in Hurure village. Actually, there is a lot of sources which is not reliable. We cannot rely on that information, on that sources that they are saying. For example, 300 times chemical weapon had been used in a part of Kurdistan, Avashin, a part of the war zone. But for Hurure, we met with the people. We could not meet with any people in Avashin, but we met with the people in Hurure. We met with the family that they were impacted. They shared with us that, for example, the mother, she's like 60-something years old, and after the suspected chemical weapon were used, she got a stroke. after that, and she's in the bed right now. And also, we have been told by this family, when the doctor was trying to give the treatment for one of the injured people, the gloves were melted in the hand of that doctor. And also the symptoms, like when they got bombed, they were vomiting a lot. And also the smell of the smoke was very, like, it was very strong. It was like a sulfur. And also the color of the smoke was white. So we are not expert, but even if now like the OPCW is coming to Kurdistan, they cannot find out because the impact of the bombardment on the soil, it's not valid anymore. We should have a permanent team in Iraqi Kurdistan, and very well trained and expert people. Whenever the bombing is happening, they should directly enter the village and do some tests. But how the KRG will do collaboration with them and let them to enter, it's something else. It should be under the supervision of the consulates in KRG, because they are helping. It's very clear. Turkey cannot do anything without the support of Germany, UK, and US. So it has to be under the supervision of their consulates in KRG and investigate about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamaran. Before I ask Lindsey to come in, I think Frederique's got a question she wants to put to Lindsey. Sorry, I forgot I've got to try and unmute you again, Frederique. Sorry about that. Okay, can you go? That's you.
Yes, Lindsey, thank you very much for your talk. You talked about the armed drones, and recently I was thinking, like, there has been a campaign in the past to ban landmines because they are indiscriminate, and the armed drones are exactly the opposite. You can target like one person, but they lead to extrajudicial killings. And I was wondering, the landmines and armed drones have sort of they are opposite of each other. But do you have is there any campaign I thought maybe these drones should be banned, you know? And one time it was very strange to say that about landmines because they were used so much. And now everybody agrees, well, everybody, at least, you know, in general, it's agreed that these weapons are, you know, shouldn't be used. And maybe we should go that direction too for armed drones. And I was wondering if there's any action in that direction in the anti-war movement that you're leading person in. Can you tell me more about it?
Thanks, Frederique. Lindsey?
Yeah, thanks very much, Frederica. There's actually a campaign which we do work with, which is called Drone Wars. And it's very, very good in terms of highlighting a lot of the information about drones, how they're used. And as you say, one of the main ways in which they are used are to target people that they want to kill, you know, individuals they want to kill. And, you know, if you look at the people that they pick on, it might be at times people think, well, you know, they don't feel terribly upset about that, but you've got to think about it overall and who's it going to be used against. And of course, it will be used against the people fighting for freedom and liberation. It will be used against people possibly demonstrating in some countries. I mean, I think everywhere we're looking at an increase in the sort of state repression, if you like. I mean, it's a feature, particularly in countries like Turkey, but it's also a feature in Britain, where there's a couple of very restrictive laws going through Parliament at the moment, which will make it harder for people to demonstrate, will make it harder for migrants and people of different nationalities. So I think you can see how it can be used, and definitely I'll try and put a thing in the chat about this campaign. But we work with them. They're very good people. They do lots of very good research on it. And the guy's name's Chris Cole. I'm sure Steve knows him as well. And the organization is called Drone Wars. And so check that out. And we do try to publicize the way in which they are used, because if you look at Afghanistan, for example, where, you know, ended in ignominious defeat for the US and Britain and the other forces, but drones were used incessantly against, not just against so-called terrorists, they were used against large numbers of civilians in that country. If I could just answer one of the other, I mean, I thought the discussion on chemical weapons was very interesting. I don't feel I'm particularly competent to say, you know, what we're all saying. I suppose we're not totally competent to say, but I feel there's people here much more competent to say. But I did think the question Margaret raised about the effects of all of this on women is a real issue, and that's again, you know, I mentioned Agent Orange, where it was an issue with people becoming infertile, but particularly there's a number of studies about Fallujah and what happened in Fallujah after the use of depleted uranium, and there's a lot of evidence of miscarriages, of people having babies with all sorts of serious problems when they were born, in terms of lacking limbs and other organs and things like that. And so I think this is a very big question, and it's I mean, obviously it doesn't just affect women, it doesn't just affect pregnant women, but if you think about those are usually going to be young women, and obviously it's not just what happens to them, but it's what happens to their children, then it's a very, very frightening prospect. So I think it's an important angle I think we should raise when we talk about all these questions.
But one more thing, Lindsey, like I was specifically curious, like, is there some kind of a conversation going on to try to launch a campaign to actually really ban armed drones?
Not as far as I know, but it's a good point that there should be. I mean, the point you make about landmines, and actually if you go back in history, when aerial bombardment started after the First World War, and again, you know, the people who were one of the first victims of that there was a big discussion internationally about whether bombing should be banned, and lots of people thought it should be. You know, in the League of Nations, there was a discussion about it because, well, as we now know, it would indiscriminately affect people, or now they're so sophisticated it doesn't necessarily discriminate. And there was a big discussion, should it be made illegal in the same way that landmines and things were? So definitely, I think with drones, that's a good, serious argument we ought to take up.
Okay, thanks, Lindsey. Listen, we're getting close to the end of the meeting. There's a couple of hands of what I'm going to call Ronnie.
He was asking me, and he's been killed with the other, including him, 12 young people in some small, like in small area in the outskirts of the town, and there was wind from gun wind in his body, but no blood, and he was saying that mean he was dead before being gunned down. And my uncle, when two of them, when they collect his daughter, she was 14, and the other one is his son was 17. We couldn't touch the body. I tried to touch him, my daughter, but the skin stick in my hand. That was his experience, and the skin was. And when they asked me, I said, I don't know. And there was everything about the chemical weapons being first used, kill these young people, which is there in our town, is called Idil in Shernak district. 24, when the Idil's been evacuated, so basically give ultimatum to leave until midnight. Whoever stay in a town will be neutralized. And 124 young people refuse. So they stay in a town and all being killed, and including of them, it was my nephew and four of my cousin. And they experienced, my uncle, my brother, what he's saying, and my uncle, they couldn't even touch to give their final I mean, I saw the parents feeling to just touch their dead body, but the skin was sticking in their palm of their hand. They couldn't do it. And they was sharing with me the picture, which is the smoke was quite orange smoke, and they still they say we bury it because it's according to not according to religion bury way, because we couldn't do it, we couldn't wash them body, so they bury it. If them, I'm wondering if that will be like any journalist when they have go contact with a chemical expert, whether these will still they can later see they open their grave and might be making some tests whether this will be possible. But these my first hand, my own family.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thank you. We are running short of time, so I'm going to ask Margaret, and then I see Ruzgar Ali, he's got his hand up as well, but you need to be very brief with your questions, please. Margaret, sorry, I keep forgetting I've got you on mute. Right, Margaret, can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
On you go, Margaret, on you go.
Okay, well, very, very quickly. Again, I mean, what we're hearing from all of you is just so absolutely terrible. And but I'm talking here from London, we really have to do much more to make the UK government accountable. When you talk about the huge increase in arms sales to Turkey, and also we actually also were making here parts, I think the laser parts of the drones. And as we've all been saying, where the drones which actually target can actually target and kill particular people. But what I wanted to say is I think you've really got to mount it much more here. And when I did a paper maybe a couple of years ago about the impact of the arms trade on women and girls, and then I discovered that in the MOD, I mean, we are breaking the arms treaty all the time, and we've never had a judicial review. Why we haven't had a judicial review? They had one on selling arms to Saudi Arabia, but we've never yet had it for Turkey. But when I looked into it, I found that there were actually no women on those committees in the MOD that decide whether or not we can sell arms to people. So I think this is something that we've got to, and that we've really got to mount and be ever so much more vigorous to actually ensure that we stop selling arms to Turkey.
Thanks,
and that we
Margaret.
actually get much more information now about how it does impact on women and girls. And people like, nobody knows about it in this country. The Yazidis, I mean, you know, what they're doing in Sinjar. When I tell people, they're absolutely shocked.
Margaret, when I have to ask you.
It's not any.
Margaret,
anywhere.
thank you. Thank you. Very, very quickly, Ruzgar Ali, if you could unmute. Ruzgar, are you there? Can you unmute? No. Okay, Stella, you've got your hand up. We'll take Stella, and then we really need to move to closing. Can you unmute, Stella?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, on you go, please. Thank you.
Well, I think before we go to the last part of the summary of the meeting, I would like listening to the discussions. I want to say just a few words of the aim and perspectives and the strategies of the coalition. The coalition was set up by Peace in Kurdistan and campaign against criminalizing communities and Defend Kurdistan, which is a UK-based organization. Now, obviously, Kampak, as most of you know, stands against criminalization of communities. So we have already a network there. And when we got together, that is Steve and myself, one of the first things we did was to actually appeal to the various campaigns that were in the anti-militant, anti-war movement to form a kind of support coalition, meaning to say, to reach out to people like in the drone war campaign that you mentioned today, to reach out to people, Stop the War, to reach out to CND, to reach out to other organizations, and to inclusive, of course, in particular areas in the UK, for example, the Irish in a particular struggle, Wales, and of course Scotland, etc. So I can say, plus of course members of parties who support environmental movements. Okay, so we have now about a coalition of 75 people, which includes drone war, which includes CND, which includes arms trade, you know, the section of the arms trade, you know, the campaign against the arms trade, and other people, plus members from the parliament, and a couple of people even from you know, other parties, inclusive even the Conservative, Liberals, and the Green Party. So all I'm saying is that what is absolutely vital is that we build a large network with the campaigns that are already there. And it has proved that in this period, in the past, what is it, Stephen, 6, 7 months? No, 2, 3 months. We have been able to put, well, 75 at the moment in this coalition who are on our email lists and who attend the meeting. Plus, we can also proudly say the support of the Center for Kurdish Studies, who helped us to set up this meeting. So I'm specifically wanting to stress this. This is not just one meeting, and this is already the result of a campaign of 7 months, where all these issues that were raised by people are already somewhere in the beginning of the discussion. So we are planning through the delegation that is leaving at the end of the month, which includes 4 trade union leading members, okay, from different organizations, from different parties. Plus Steve, plus Julie Ward will be on it, the ex-MEP, and also a filmmaker from France. So, I mean, this will happen in the next sort of couple of weeks, and we will produce the report. And of course, one of the elements now that we have with this meeting tonight is a big report from Steve, which we are obviously, hopefully, are able to use to circulate widely, you know. And as I said, in this connection, of course, I would especially thank Lindsey tonight, because she's one of the most active supporters and has, you know, obviously has agreed to speak at the meeting tonight. And I just wanted to stress this very important point. Okay, so people who are today there, we had at some point almost 60 people, which isn't bad, considering that there are so many webinars and issues which are important and are going on. I would say, please join the coalition, okay, and help us build the network. And of course, the appeal is also to Iraqi Kurds, to Iraqi Kurdistan, you know, any new people, any new group that could provide us with support, you know, when we send the delegation would be very welcome. So thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Stella. We are now over our time, but I'm going to go around the 3 speakers just to, for very brief summing up at the end. So I'll go back to Kamaran. First, Kamaran, do you wish to make a short statement at the end? Thank you. Sorry, can you not mute?
Yeah.
Got
Can you
it,
hear
right.
me now?
Yes, Cameron.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your support and your very nice words about Kurdistan. And thanks for supporting Iraqi Kurdish people and Kurdish people around the world and the whole people, all the people around the world that are suffering from the war. It's very, very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cameron. Lindsey.
Yeah, just to echo Kamaran, it's really good to have been here tonight. I think it's been a great discussion and great contributions, and that I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody has learned from each other, and we need more of these sorts of meetings. That the bits I take from Stop the War is we have to make our government more accountable over the arms sales to Turkey, and let's face it, all the other things that they're up to in various parts of the world. You know, we've got a big job here, but we must keep this very, very much in the forefront of our minds. So again, thanks very, very much for inviting me, and good luck with the campaign, and Steve, very good luck with the report. I'm sure it's going to be incredibly useful for so many people. So thank you.
Thanks, Lindsey. Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the report makes a number of recommendations, which kind of ties things together. And as we've heard across the meeting, that there's undoubtedly war crimes being committed in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I think that's the overriding message, certainly of my time in the region, is we can debate whether chemical weapons have been used or not used, but we do know that civilian populations have been targeted. We do know that politicians have been targeted. We do know that hospitals have been targeted. We do know that refugee camps have been targeted. We do know that people have been shot dead in the street in the middle of the city as Turkey has brought its war from the mountains and into the city. These are things that we do know. These are concrete facts. Turkey doesn't even deny them. They just think that they can get away with doing them because it has done for so many years. So I think one of the key things that needs to happen is that Erdogan needs to be charged with war crimes. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, is a war criminal. There's absolutely no doubt about that anymore. But also, further to that, those that have been supplying him with the weapons must also be held accountable. Those that have been providing the political support for Erdogan must also be held accountable. It's very clear, Turkish forces must withdraw from all Kurdish land immediately, without delay. I think that's another demand that we should be making. As well as the demand to stop arms sales to Turkey, as well as the demand to stop normal relations with Turkey. But also the United States, I would say, has to leave Iraq and Syria, where it operates as a destabilizing force. It's, the United States, the world's biggest imperialist power, has never been a force for good anywhere on the planet. And there's evidence to suggest that its role in both those areas is problematic. We must demand that the PKK is delisted as a terrorist organization. This is again one of the weapons that is used by the imperialist powers to justify Turkey's action. Not only does it criminalize the entirety of the Kurdish people, it also serves to justify the attacks, because Turkey always says we were neutralizing terrorists. We were neutralizing, and to Turkey, every single Kurdish person is a terrorist. And they will hit them discriminately, they will hit them indiscriminately, they don't care. But the main thing I think was that Estella touched upon, there isn't a legal solution to this. This is a deeply political problem, so the answer must be a political one as well. We're not going to win this by force of argument. We can, I've written a report, but we can present it to the government. They're not going to be swayed by a report by Steve Sweeney from the Morning Star. What they are going to be swayed by is the building of a mass movement, and that means in the Labour, the Progressive, and the trade union movements, we absolutely have to build a really strong movement in solidarity with the Kurdish people. That means joining forces with the anti-war movement as well, are a very key part of that. So that's the thing that we absolutely must do. Of course, we need to keep on highlighting the atrocities, the war crimes, the chemical attacks, attacks, the extrajudicial executions, and all of these things. And we need to, and hopefully next week we'll be going out, taking a delegation back out to the region. So we may get to the affected areas. I'm very sceptical whether we will or not. I had to smuggle in. I can't really go into too much detail of how I got in there, but this is another part of the narrative, is that that there was a very strong effort to stop the story of the Kurdish people and the chemical attacks from being told, and there's, you know, that narrative is being controlled not only by people being blocked from entering the area, but also the fact that the media inside Kurdistan is entirely controlled by the ruling families, the Barzanis and the Talibanis. So that is again another problem. But yeah, I'll finish with that and just say thank you very much for organising what has been, I think, a fantastic meeting. There's copies of the report in the chat. If you want another copy, then you can send me an email. The email address is in the chat, but it's stevesweeney@peoples-press.com, and I'm happy to speak to anybody about the content of the report if you want to speak at any meetings, because I think we need to really start pressing home the point that Turkey is a terror state.
Steve, thank you very much. I want to just wind the meeting up by thanking everyone for coming along. I want to thank the Centre for Kurdish Studies for hosting, Kurdish Progress, sorry, for hosting it, and Svetlana specifically for doing the techie bits to allow us to have the meeting. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank Kamaran, Lindsey, and particularly Steve for speaking tonight. I commend the report to you all. It should be anyone who's interested in the region, anybody who's interested in war, anybody who's interested in the arms trade. This should be essential reading. And I would urge you to share it with your friends, to take it into your trade union branches, your political parties, your churches, wherever else you can share, to let people know what's going on. This is not simply about exposing Turkey. This is about standing in solidarity with the Kurdish people in the region who need our support, and anything we can do to help them. Mention has been made of the delegation, which is going out there soon. We will organise events on their return so that they can tell us what they saw and what they learned from the delegation. So look out for that invite in the near future. And with that, I just want to thank you all again for coming. Thank you to the speakers, and wish you all a safe rest of the evening, and keep safe. Thank you all very much. Cheers then. Bye-bye.